Yes, now, because it's long time already, I think 3 weeks already, we did not deal with Mark's Gospel. So, just to start with, from the beginning, just a very small introduction about the Mark's Gospel. So, when we look into the order of the Gospels, there are 4 Gospels we know. It is the second one in the order in the Bible, no? Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John. There is nothing in that order. We don't have anything special in that order. In the same sense, the Matthew's Gospel was written first, and then Mark and Luke and John. We cannot say because, but that was the original understanding when it was put in that order. Because Matthew's Gospel was considered to be the first one. But later, the modern studies shows that the Matthew's Gospel is not the first one, to be written. It is Mark's Gospel. But I have already explained before. The Matthew's Gospel could be there was another Gospel, Matthew's Gospel, written in Aramaic Gospel. That is completely lost. We don't have any trade of that, any manuscript or anything. In that sense, we can say the Matthew's Gospel could be the first one. But the problem is, we don't exactly. The Gospel of Matthew is a translation, Aramaic, translation of the Aramaic Gospel into the Greek, or this Gospel of Matthew is altogether written new. We are not sure about it. But most scholars think the Gospel of Matthew is something new, not simply a translation of the Aramaic Gospel. So, and Mark, when we consider that, Mark was the first one to be written in the chronological order. Okay, but that is. The order is, the book order is the second one. Okay. Another one is this Gospel written by Saint Mark, the disciple of Saint Peter. So, I have already explained it was the practice when something was written, when it was considered to be what's called, inspired by God, and when it was accepted in the canon of the Bible, it was necessary that it was to be written either by an apostle or by a direct disciple of an apostle. Because to be included in the canon of the Bible, what do you mean by the canon of the Bible? Do you know that? That means the 27 books is the called canon. That means the number in which that group of books which are considered to be inspired by God. So one criteria was apostolic tradition. That means it is written by the apostles or their direct disciples. Okay? So in that sense, Mark's Gospel is not written by an apostle but a direct disciple of apostle. Mark was, of course, the disciple of Saint Peter. Yeah, and therefore, apostolic tradition, that criteria is met, of course. So it was he, and who was Mark, of course, is considered to be what's called a Jewish. We are not so sure about it. This man first followed, of course, Peter and all his journeys, and accompanied Peter, and therefore whatever he says in the Gospel is coming from Saint Peter. Okay, Saint Peter. So almost the narratives given by St. Mark is almost like it's a narrative given by St. Peter, the Prince of Apostles. So in that sense we can say it is an apostolic tradition. Then we don't have any mention of its specific author or the name, anything in the Gospel. We don't see that. So according to tradition, Mark is the companion of St. Peter. Then in the tradition of the church, in the church fathers like Papias, Irenaeus, and people testified that Mark wrote this gospel and he was the disciple of St. Peter. So in the 2nd century onwards, the writings appear clearly showing that St. Mark wrote this gospel and he was a disciple of St. Peter. Then this book was written anyway after 70 AD. After 70 AD. We are not sure exact time when it was written. But one thing is very clear, the Gospel of Mark was written after the year AD 70. Why AD 70 is specific? We can, without doubt, we can say that Gospel was written after 70 AD. Why?
The temple's been taught.
Yes, because there is a reference, indirect reference that the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed by the time. So when Gospel of Mark was written, that was already destroyed. There is a reference.
7-8.
AD 70.
AD
70. AD. Anno Domini. So it was this year that the temple was destroyed. So there is an indirect reference. So see, Jesus was speaking, for example, Jesus was speaking, if you destroy this temple, I will build it in 3 days. Of course, in reference to his resurrection, but also a reference to the destruction. Another thing is, this temple will be destroyed. And there is a saying, Jesus, when Jesus was standing on the Mount Olives, and then he was looking to the temple, and he was, weeping over the temple in Jerusalem, and then he was predicting that the temple will be destroyed. And there is a church now, Jesus Flavit. There is a church that is called Flavit, means cried. And there is a temple there. Jesus cried. There, he looking at Jerusalem, he cried. And where that supposed to be, there is a church now. From there we can see the Jerusalem Tower, because it's on the top of Mount Olives, and therefore, and he was predicting it. This prediction, of course, when the Gospels was written, that was already happened. Yes. So there is a reference. That's why there is a reference for us that the Gospel was written after 70. Okay. Then, who were the audience of this Gospel? Audience.
Jewish people.
Yeah, they are, primarily it's a Gentile Greek-speaking residents of Roman Empire. Of the Roman Empire, that is mostly Gentile Greek-speaking residents. Of course, the Gospel of Matthew was written specifically for the Jewish Christians. Christians who are, who were Jewish people, converted from Jewish religion to Christianity. So because there are so many references to the Old Testament, there are so many references to the Jewish traditions, so many references, Mosaic laws and things like that in the Gospel of Matthew. So that much is not seen in the Gospel of Mark, because its audience is general, mostly Greek-speaking Gentile community. But it doesn't exclude, of course, the Jews. Whenever it was necessary to make a reference to the Jewish laws and customs, of course, Mark did it. So it was not just like, but you just take the Gospel of St. John. It is purely, mostly it was written to the Greek-speaking Gentile world. That means the Hellenistic group. And it has...
That's the Gospel of John?
Gospel of John. Mostly a kind of philosophical, what's called Greek-speaking, Hellenistic influence, no? Everywhere there, and we don't have that much of influence of Jewish tradition in Gospel of John. We don't see that. We don't see a kind of, usually we don't see a cross-reference to the Old Testament. Or Jewish customs and traditions are explained. And that's why the first three Gospels, we call it as synoptic Gospels, because they look alike. But the John's Gospel is entirely different, and it is written specifically for non-Jewish but Greek-speaking, a Hellenistic group of Christians. So only when we understand that kind of the audience, only then we will understand why this is written. So that's why when we talk about the Gospel of Matthew, we insistently always told that it is a Jewish background Christianity. No? We always told, we always understood there is a very clearly Jewish background is there. So, but for Mark, it is not so. It is almost like it's very neutral. But for Luke, again, that is very interesting to see. Luke is specifically written for a Gentile Christian community. Gentile, and Luke puts, things which are, extolling, praising the Jewish, the Gentile Christians. You can see so many incidents that Luke, inserts very clear, specifically showing that the audience was a Gentile. But Mark is a kind of a neutral. It's a kind of a neutral. But Gentile, that means, not specifically anything special, but it's almost like a Greek-speaking Gentile community. Okay? Why? Because, that's why in Matthew, we see, for example, the genealogy of Christ starts from Abraham, because clearly showing the Jewish background. While in in Luke, it starts from Adam. That means it is nothing, Jesus' connection is nothing with the Jews, but it is from Adam. That means the humanity. And then there are so many places where Jesus praises the Gentiles. Very clearly. Jesus praises Gentiles. And that openness to universalism is very clear, very evident in Luke. But that's not very clear. For example, in Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, I am called and sent for the Jews, because they were the promised people, covenant people. And Jesus specifically says that in the Gospel of Matthew, but that is disappeared when it came to Gospel of Luke. Even though that is the specificity, even though they look alike, these minute details are, other differences. Because the author has a specific purpose in writing the Gospel.
What I'm having difficulty with is that I understand the writings. I understand if I look at them in a spiritual way, I can grasp the concept. The concept I don't understand is the dynamic that convinced the Gentiles, the non-believers, to come to Christ. I mean, how did these disciples do that in the time where there's so much paganism and again, and maybe more attachment to the Jewish rite? How were the disciples effective enough to convince people to follow Christ?
At that time, maybe, that is of course, when we spiritually look into, that this is the work of the Holy Spirit, we can very easily give an answer and evade the question.
Exactly, yes.
No, not that. But when we look into rationally, when we look into that, there was some backgrounds that really triggered. There is some background. Hey Joe, you see beautiful banana bird? Look there.
All right, we'll try that next.
So, he fell in the temptation.
It was easy to convince.
Properly directed.
Okay, so, okay, at that time when Jesus was born, there are several factors that really supported this. One thing was, already almost all the nations were almost unified under Roman Empire.
Right.
And that was very easy for the disciples as apostles go around the world without difficulty. Because it was all around, it was all a one nation, Roman Empire. Even though for the Jews it was not a very good thing. But we say, at least we understand, in the salvific history, and God made that intervention so that Christianity could spread everywhere. Another thing is, very clearly, this is very important. The most important fact to that question is, when Christ was born at that time, the paganism was already deteriorated so much. And they were just, in the Roman Empire, that background was, they were just, they were not really believing. Many of them just having that idea, or what's called holding that religion, paganism. And it was so much deteriorated. And people really felt a vacuum for something, a spiritual nourishment. And when Christianity came, filling that gap, and it was completely new from the old one in its outlook, in its way of life, giving something new, very, very strong. And especially the Christians, at least the people felt that it was the religion of the poor. And you see, everywhere we can see the slaves and the poor, they were attracted to Christianity mostly because they had the great hope of salvation in a God who suffered. So those poor people really felt that Jesus became man to save them, and Jesus was just like them because they were all poor, oppressed, and at that time, of course, the slavery was in its highest peak.
Father, I guess paganism was kind of exclusive, whereas Christianity was inclusive.
No, paganism was not so much exclusive, no. Paganism was really open to everything. The Jewish...
But it had been corrupted.
Oh yeah, it was so corrupted, sure. It was so deteriorated. Its morality was nothing. They could kill anyone. They could rape anyone. They could do whatever they like. And really, we cannot say that, see, the Roman Empire, the history of the Caesars. And there was a beautiful book, written at that time, AD 30 to 70 time. Suetonius wrote a book, The History of the Caesars. And it's all, if you have time, And when I was interested, there is a beautiful book, it was written 2000 years ago, before the Gospels written. The history of the Caesars, I think almost like 10 Caesars' life is explained there. And Nero, for example, one. He could kill his mother, his wife, anyone who seemed a threat to him. And there is no justice. Nothing is there. If you could survive, that's because luck.
Father, that is something that not only went on back then, it's hard to believe, but that is happening in our time today. Look at North Korea. The leader of North Korea is killing all of his family.
You gotta take the whole thing?
It's a human nature thing.
Look, I just told him take one, but he possessed it now.
Where we did that?
Joe, this couple, they brought it.
Yes.
Okay, I was taking, just a joke now. To wake up from. Joe's joke. No. So, okay, that's why the reason, almost like. And really, people wanted something new, solid, really, that deep, and give them hope, and that all provided by Christianity. For example, for morality, they did not have any morality at all. I don't know. In our standard, we cannot even say what is morality for them. Even the state could persecute Christians without reason. You know that? Without reason. Why Christians are persecuted? No reason is given. And the state-sponsored persecution of Christians. Why? No ethical answer. For any reason.
Yeah, because at the time the Christian really was not trying to, get the power.
Nothing.
But they were taking power. I mean, giving all these
yes, but in a
people and then
different-
taking them from
way.
there. In a way
It
of
was,
life.
it was a pacific way of taking.
Yeah, and that's why or to get married, if I want to get someone, take it. That's all. Whether your wife or your sister, that doesn't matter. I want her. I go there and take it. Take her. If you have power, if you have money, do that.
That happens to people with money and power.
But at least,
There is laws.
at least there are laws, no? Only at least understanding and a mutual agreement should be there. Mutual agreement,
So basically, Christianism it was more appealing to the mass.
Sure, all the people, mass. Of course, this light group, no. The light group came only after Constantinian turning point. Sure. So that was the background. And so, for example, another thing is then some of the Jewish traditions are explained clearly for the benefit of non-Jews. And we see some of the Aramaic words appear clearly in the Mark Gospel. For example, see, Talitha kum. That means when that girl was raised to, from death to life. So Jesus was speaking, he said, girl, rise up. But he specifically uses Talitha kum. That is Aramaic. Or Ephatha. Open. Yeah. Or another thing is korban. That is when you say, when in the case of when Jesus was speaking about the divorce and things like that, he is speaking korban. For example, Mark 7:11. When you give to your parents something and say it's korban, your duty is over. Like that, it is Mark 7:11. Then Abba. That's all. All these things, references are, these are references very specifically he uses for Aramaic, and then see he uses whenever something related with the Old Testament, when he uses the translation of the Septuagint translation. Understand? What is Septuagint translation?
Remind us, Father, you told us.
I don't
Remind us again.
understand.
You told us before, I thought, but remind us again.
Yeah, that is the Septuagint means the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek. There are different translations, and one translation's name is Septuagint, 70. Septuagint means 70 because it is translated by 70 elders. This is Latin, no? This is Latin. 50, 60, 70.
Looks.
Okay. Latin scripts are like that, It is written like that, no? 1, 2, 3, no? You know that, Latin. Very simple. It has no zero.
Well, we call them the Roman numbers, right?
That's why Latin. Roman numbers. Okay. This translation, it is a official translation of the Jewish religion, because there were translations and they were not satisfied. So the Council of Jamnia, that is a council of the elders, they decided to appoint 70 people to translate a new translation from the Hebrew Bible to Greek, and they translated it. And that translation is considered to be, is called Septuagint. Another translation, for example, by individuals. So Aquila, a Jew, he translated the Old Testament to the Greek. Or Theodosius, or Symmachus. So why I say these translations? Origen, the church father, used these 4 translations in order to create a new critical edition of the Bible. Oh, it's all complicated, no?
But it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah, because
This is all about the Old Testament.
this is only about Old Testament. Why I insist this Septuagint, because there is now a point, and I just want to say something about the Protestant idea, and what a contrast it is now they are following. That's why I want to say that. That's why I say, in the Mark's Gospel, whenever there is a reference of the Old Testament, he uses the Septuagint translation. Not only he, all the Gospels. Saint Paul, the Christian tradition from the very beginning used only the Septuagint translation.
Now, was that translation the springboard for the New Testament? Did that affect the beginning of the New Testament?
Sure.
Okay.
It was before.
Now it makes even more sense.
It was before. That means, the beginning, the writing of the translation. Before the writing of the Gospels, already this translation was in existence. It was already there. And Christians invariably, from the very beginning of their history, invariably used the Greek translation, Septuagint translation of the Old Testament.
That was the universal language.
The Greek,
Greek.
But there were, but that's not, that is true, but, for example, there were other translations. Sure. There were other translations of the same Old Testament, of the Hebrew Old Testament to Greek. For example, Aquila, a Jewish man, a Jewish rabbi, he translated the Old Testament, the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek. Aquila, Theodosius, Symmachus. And that's why what I am saying, the 2nd century, in the 2nd century AD, that means at almost like in the 119, something like that, Origen was living, and he used in the beginning of the 3rd century, that is 200, almost like in 230 or something like that, that period, Origen used these 4 translations. For example, Septuagint, the translation by Theodosius, the translation by Aquila, translation by Symmachus. All these 4 translations were put together one after another in 4 columns, and he made a comparative study of it, the differences, in almost like between 230 to 60, something like that period. And that study is called Hexapla. And not only these 4, and again with that another one. So in first column he put the Hebrew Bible in its original Hebrew language. Then second, the Hebrew Bible but in Greek character, what we call transliteration. What is that? Or transcribing. What is that? For example, if my native language, my kids, in the church, most of them don't know. So what we do, we write in English character. My native language is, some words and things like that. And they say it without knowing the language. Understand? What do we call it?
You can't write it, but you know how to say it.
Yeah. Transcribing?
Translation, yeah.
No translation.
Transcribe.
Yeah. So the second group, Origen put a transcription of the Hebrew, but in Greek words. That's for punctuation and pronunciation. And the next 4 columns, these 4 translations are put, and these 4 translations are compared, and he made what that is called a critical edition. Why the difference here? Translation of Symmachus says this, why Septuagint says this. A very good example. For example, when we always say refer, that is very interesting to note in the Gospels. When we say a virgin will conceive a child, that we see the translation on the virgin, the word virgin, we see only in the Septuagint translation. All other translations in Hebrew original, it is not a virgin.
What?
It is a woman.
That's a big difference.
Yes. In Hebrew original, it is a woman shall conceive a child. And all other translations say a woman. But in Septuagint translation, they translated it virgin.
That changed the whole meaning.
They changed the whole understanding. Understand now? So that's why the Christians consider the Septuagint translation is also somewhere or other inspired to prepare for Jesus.
That was written before Christ was born. The Septuagint.
Yes.
Yes, Old Testament. They were from the Old Testament.
It's all Old Testament. It's only a translation.
Yeah.
So that makes the difference, no?
But that's what Jesus was studying, was the Septuagint. Is that correct?
But we cannot say.
The translation?
Jesus was using Aramaic. So, and we have no proof that Jesus knew Greek.
So we don't know what he was.
No, I don't think so. He used the Greek thing. He used Hebrew.
The local language of the land.
Yeah, but this is did you get the difference? So when the Septuagint translation, the Christians invariably, without doubt, used always, because all these things, all the New Testament books were written in Greek. So all the references to the Old Testament, which was originally written in Hebrew, but always the Christians used a translation, and that translation is
Greek translation.
that means the Septuagint Greek translation. Always. Christians never used anything.
Greece was considered the language of the educated people.
Yeah. So this one, and from the very beginning this was used. And when we understand, when we look into the Gospels or any other New Testament writings, when it has a reference to the Old Testament writings, it is invariably, without doubt, it's all referring to the Septuagint, the translation. And whenever, after the New Testament was written, so our Bible constituted, whose Bible? Christians' Bible constituted the Septuagint translation of the Old Testament and the New Greek New Testament. Understand? Yes.
I'm kind of, because you're shifting from the Old Testament to the New Testament, but I'm trying to, and I understand the Septuagint. I understand that refers, but now, since you used the word virgin, that is New Testament stuff. So how did that make it into that translation?
No, that's not a New Testament.
It was
Prophecy.
prophesied.
Oh, then, okay.
That's why I say the Septuagint is, we consider kind of there is inspiration.
Now I understand.
And this, we used it, in the New Testament. Not the other way. New Testaments carried to the Old Testament, no. This was made by the Jewish rabbi and not the Christians, and before the birth of Christ.
About what year? Do we really know? 100?
Sure, we have to, I'm not so sure when it is.
But
we can see that. No problem. It's very easy, just look into the internet, it gets, zoom. It's very easy.
It says 200 to 300 years before Christ.
Yeah.
Thank you, Javi.
So it's 200, 300 before Christ, birth of Christ. And now you will see more. It's a difference, the understanding. Then there was a change, and this translation was accepted by the Christians, and they took it as a kind of an official translation of the Old Testament thing, inspired translation by the Christians. The Jews later abandoned it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Funny.
Yes. Because that's why because yes, because in this translation all the deuterocanonical books are included. That was later, centuries later. All the deuterocanonical books are, for example, Esther, Tobit, I think Judith, all these seven books. Seven deuterocanonical books were included in that translation. All these. And because they see that the Christians are, I don't know, not only the Christians, maybe that's the most important reason. The Jews abandoned it. And they took away the deuterocanonical books from their Bible. They did not accept it later. And following that, our friends of Protestants, they removed it.
About when did they remove Greece? More or less, when was this that they removed them?
Well, we have to, I'm not so sure exactly. The Christian, the Jews, his question, when the Jews, they abandoned it.
The 2nd century.
The 2nd century?
It have to be after Christ.
Yes, sure, that's sure. And following that, until the Protestant Revolution in 1549, something like that. No, 1459 like that. That Luther started in 1494. The 90 Theses, no? Until that time, without any question, all the Christian, the church used it, and after that, the Protestants used it. Later, they made a decision that because it doesn't these deuterocanonical books, because it doesn't contain in the Old Testament Jewish canon of the Bible, they say the church later added it and they removed it. What a nonsense, no? Look.
They didn't have
It's a
Google.
misunderstanding.
They didn't have Google to check it out though.
Understand now the importance and difference. When they say, so no, this is not. When they say, you have to know. When they say, oh, these deuterocanonical books are not a part of Jewish Bible now. We did not take, not simply the Jewish Bible later, but we took when it was there, when Christ was born.
Father, can you write down the word you're using for the 7 books that get pulled out?
That I think
Yeah, you give it.
the Judith, I have given one day. I read Judith, Esther, Judith, Maccabees 2, and then Tobit.
Maccabees, but
Yeah, then 2 more. Sirach. Yeah.
All those books are referred to as the That's what book?
that the big word you're using.
That is
7.
yeah, that is called Deuterocanonical books. Deutero. Deuterocanonical means the second level. Deuterocanonical. Canon, no canon of the Bible. Deutero. Deutro. Deuteronomy. Canon means the canon of the Bible.
Did having to do with God?
No.
No.
The later second, I think, Deutero, canonical Bible. The second phase. Okay, so
I just wanted to make a comment. This brings to mind the Rosetta Stone. Because it had the 3 languages on it. It had the Greek and the Deuteric. And from those 2 they could decipher the hieroglyphics.
I don't have any idea of that.
Oh, okay. Well, we've got a replica of it
Okay, yeah.
on the wall. And
I did not get it. Yeah.
told me.
So this is something interesting now.
Very interesting.
Wow.
So, and this is about the audience of the Bible. I mean, audience of Mark. Now, let us see something about the problem of ending of Mark. It has a problem. We don't see that if you have Bible, take Bible. Mark 16:9-20. Mark 16. That's the last chapter. Mark 16. Yeah, Mark 16.
Okay.
So
The last verse of
the last verse. So before that, for example, so the Mark, the first part, for example, 16, first to Mark 61 to 8. So they went out and ran from the tomb, distressed and terrified. They said nothing to anyone, because they were afraid. And that was the kind of ending of the gospel. And then how the ninth verse starts. Read. Ninth.
What?
The ninth verse.
start on number 9. Read number 9.
Ninth row. No, chapter 16. Yeah. What is the okay, can you read the ninth verse?
He had risen early on the first day of the week. He appeared first to Mary.
Okay, that's okay. See, how did the gospel, before the ninth verse, can you read the 8th one?
Then they went out and fled from the tomb, seized with trembling and bewilderment.
Okay, it's finished, no? The 8th one, no? Okay, yeah.
Nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
So they saw the empty tomb and things like that. They were terrified. Then they ran And that is a kind of ending. Now comes the verse 9. No? Now you read 9 again.
When he had risen early on the first day of the week.
Do you see any connection between 8 and 9?
No. Actually don't make sense. The 9 don't make sense after 8.
It was like it was added.
It's very clear that was an addition.
What was an addition? 8 or 9?
9.
9. Oh,
9 through
9 was the addition.
Only thing is that, just please everyone read. If you have Bible, 8, very carefully. That, read it if you have. It's very easy then. Yeah. Easy. It's very easy. The 8th. So they went out, ran from the tomb, distressed and terrified. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Yeah, carefully, not simply reading. Then comes again, after Jesus rose from the dead, early on Sunday. What is the connection between 8 and 9? It doesn't flow, no?
No.
And mine's even titled the longer ending.
Yes.
First of all, you have to understand, okay, that's nice to, you referred about a title. Title doesn't belong to Bible. The titles, chapters, the number of verses, they do not belong to Bible. That's only for practical purposes added later, very later. And that's why when we read in the church, we don't read the titles. That's only for convenience sake, we put, that's a kind of that's not a part of inspired Bible. Okay? That's not a part of, once I think I showed you in the PowerPoint, when you were present, you understand how the manuscripts were written. The PowerPoint, just all together, even without a space, without a break of each word. It's just flowing like a stream. And unless you don't know, unless you know that the clearly the language, you won't get it, and you will make surely mistake.
All the way from 9 to 20, it was an addition. What is that part between, after 17 and 18 about they will take in their hands serpents and they will not be beaten and they
that's because the commission by Jesus, no? That's why all those things are the last one, that is an addition. That's a clear indication because that was later added. Later added means that doesn't really belong to the book of Mark originally. Just like, very clearly, just like the Gospel of John, chapter 21 is an addition. You just take Gospel of John, very clear. Just I want to, because you are amazed. What are you talking? So I just want to make again another example. Chapter John 20, last verse. And in John, it is much more clear. Okay. So, John chapter 20, what is the last, the verse, that means 30.
Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through this belief you may have life in his name.
Very clear, the gospel ends there, no? There are so many things Jesus have done, and they are not written here. And all those things which are written here, why? It is because you believe in Jesus so that you may have life in him. And that is very clearly, anybody with a little criticism in his mind, looking into a little deeper things, can very clearly understand that that's the end of. That's the end of the book.
The whole chapter 21 was an addition.
Very clear. And that's why the Protestant is not, the most of the Protestant Bible, they don't have chapter 21.
Well, especially since that's when Jesus tells Simon Peter, do you
Because that is wanted to give, because the Protestants removed it because it gives, what's called the power to Peter and papacy. So all those things, they don't like it, so they just removed it. Okay.
What's the purpose of the addition, Father? I mean,
Why is 21 in there? Who added that?
Who added, we don't know. Of course, later it was added to the Bible. Not later means not very late. Of course, in the first, when it was, the Gospel of John was written almost like in the 90s, no? AD 90s.
At the very end, it was.
And later, immediately in 100 and some, it was already added. Otherwise, it would not have come to the Bible. It was in the very first beginning stage of.
So what's the purpose of that, Father?
Very clear, it is, they thought that Peter, the leader of the college of apostles, so they wanted to give him clearly that, that power. Very clear, that. So, see, these are some of the things, the chapter 21, and after that, the chapter 20, verse 13-31, we see that these have been written, that those who believe without seeing me. No? And that is very clear. Then how, Mahavla, that through your faith in him you may have life. With that finish, how starts chapter 21? After this, after what?
After what just happened before.
Yeah, it's only an introduction to writing, no? So we say, Jesus having been, having said all those things, whatever. Okay, we presume that he might have said many things.
It's almost like a commentary after the
yeah, that's kind of an introduction after this. There is nothing special there. It's only this, after this means, the one who wanted to add that, wanted to, put it together and say after this.
What's that? I forgot this.
Mine's called the epilogue.
Yes.
Yeah, that's me, Yeah, that means, yeah. So very clear, that part is added. So that part, like that, the Gospel of Mark has also a problem.
Last verse or what? Last?
Yeah, I told you, that is the chapter 16, 1 to...
Basically a deduction that people make.
Yes.
It's not 100% sure because there is no existing of any original documents.
Yeah, no, that's true.
This is the end and this is an addition.
And another thing is that, as I explained to you, the from the very beginning, how Gospels were formed, there is a long tradition. So there is the what's called the oral tradition, then the writing tradition, and writings different contexts, and then putting together what's called, the redaction to a book, and then acceptance by the church, and that is done in 367.
Way after the real thing.
So almost like 400 years of history, or at least 300 years of history, to be formed the Bible as it is now.
The New Testament.
The New Testament.
Yeah.
The New Testament. So in between, whatever happened, we take it the formation period of the Bible. So when a chapter is added or some words are added, that's not an intrusion. That's a part of the Bible. Sure.
Further explain.
Yeah, it's a part of the Bible. It's inspired. Sure. So this thing, in the Gospel of Mark 2, there is an addition. There is an addition. Chapter 16, 1 to 8, that is, we can say that is the natural ending of the Gospel. Then from 9 to 20, it's like, a kind of an epilogue, kind of a further addition to the natural ending. We see very clearly it is that. So Mark 16:8 stops at a description of the empty tomb. Yeah, but then starts. See, the last 12, not only that, the last 12 verses are missing from the oldest manuscripts of the Mark's Gospel. The last, from 9 to 20, that part is absent in the oldest manuscripts too. That's another clear indication that was an addition. Okay, for example, see, that means Codex Boniensis, that's okay, that's all, it's all critical way of looking at these things. A little more deeper study of what's called, we call didactic criticism. That's, it's a very technical application of a study of the Bible. Okay, leave it. But at least, apparently, when we look into the chapter, we understand that's a different part of Bible, no? And take second evidence, we can see the oldest what's called the manuscripts. We don't have that part from 9 to 20. Gospel ends with the chapter 16, 1 to 8. But further, later when it was added, then it all included that part too. When what's called Athanasius accepted, is a part of Bible, it was already there. So it belonged to that part of the formation of the Bible, the whole thing. So that is about the problem of ending of the Bible, of Gospel of Mark. So from theology, what its theological content, what its main themes, we will take from the next class onwards. Okay? It's almost time.
We're going to do Mark next week?
Sure.
All right.
We are going to continue with that.
Father, will we ever get to discuss the actual formation of the